we're not saying like, oh yeah, Wizards needs to do this to change this game. It's like, if you are going to make a game like this, maybe look at some of what Commander is dealing with and consider like, what do you want your game to be like?
Distraction makers.
We thought we'd make a video to sort of organize our thoughts about Commander and maybe talk about the things that, maybe if Commander was designed today, some things that we might change about the game.
On this channel, obviously, we talk a lot about Commander, and a lot of the times we kind of discuss the complicated nature of free-for-all multiplayer games and the whole mixed bag of problems that come with them, and how some games, creatively have solved them. I was going to point to some, but none of these actually do that. But, we talked about King of Tokyo, Settlers of Catan, some of these other games that sort of have interesting solutions to these sort of problems.
Oh, no, Keyforge.
Oh, Keyforge does have a free-for-all multiplayer one. Yeah, and you know what? They solved it. They not solved, but they have something that alleviates a problem. So we'll bring that up later.
Yeah.
Smooth.
Stick around. Before we talk more about Commander, like and subscribe. And this video is also brought to you by
my Kickstarter, which is currently live, but is probably going to be only live for another day or two by the time this video comes out. So if you are interested in any of the playmats that you should be seeing flying across your screen right now, please check it out.
Time's running out.
That's right. I have to say that.
Also, playmats are exclusive to the Kickstarter. So if you do want any of these playmats, this is your last chance. They will never be printed again.
Never, ever be printed again. It's not like, oh, they won't be printed again with stitched edges or anything. They will never be printed again.
All right. Back to the video.
Wasn't a direct attack or anything. Yeah, this is more so, we're assuming that, when Commander products started being officially created by Wizards and supported by Wizards, that it was a lighthearted product that was, we'll support the community that's been playing this format, right? And they don't want to change the format by saying, oh, you guys like Commander, we're going to make our own Commander and adjust some of these rules because we could see this being a problem. It doesn't matter because they know this audience already knows this type of a game. We're going to support that type of a game and not try and convert a bunch of players by shifting the rules in a way they're not familiar with.
So some people might not know that Commander was not designed by Wizards of the Coast. It was designed by a group of judges who were judges for Magic, and they wanted to create a format that they could play to sort of wind down after judging for major tournaments. And they developed what is now known as Commander. It used to be called Elder Dragon Highlander.
Right. EDH.
EDH. The reason why it was called Elder Dragon Highlander is because originally the format was centered around the Elder Dragons, which is like Nicobolus and I can't remember the other ones.
Other ones that are less important.
Other ones,
right.
Yeah. And Highlander because there can only be one,
right.
Which is you can only have one card. Those of you who don't know, Highlander is a movie. It's not good. But you can only have one copy of each card. So that's where the namesake comes from. And so basically what we wanted to talk about is maybe either if we were to sort of design a format that was inspired by Commander, what would that end up kind of looking like?
Right. And I think also with bringing this up, this is probably going to be happening. And in fact, it's already happening. For any people that maybe is a little bit more connected to some of the more niche sort of card games that might be on the horizons. If you're going and looking at some of the upcoming games in Kickstarter, a lot of games are starting to come out that are supporting this free-for-all multiplayer format. Or there's games, like we mentioned Keyforge, that are starting to integrate their own version of a free-for-all multiplayer game because that just seems to be what the industry is leaning towards. It seems to be what a lot of players are interested in for whatever reason. And so a lot of games are starting to be made with this way. And so if you are a designer yourself and you are interested in making a game similar to this, we might have a couple talking points that might be interesting to consider.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's get started. I think the first thing that we would change, and this is one that's specific to Commander and its relationship to Magic, is that instead of everybody having 40 life, I think everybody probably needs to have 20. Maybe 25 I could see the argument for, but the reason why is because Magic has 20 health is what's called a set point. And a set point in game design means that it's a number that remains consistent so that you can balance the rest of the game around it.
Right.
So 20 is the number that most cards in Magic are balanced around. Now, the original design ethos of Commander was that they wanted to make sure that the game would go long, and cards that normally wouldn't be able to see play because aggressive decks would beat them too quickly for them to get to those higher mana cost things.
Right.
They're like, well, an easy solve for that is to double everyone's life totals.
Yeah.
However, there are quite a few unintended consequences. The major one being that we have an episode about the strategy circle, which talks about the 3 different macro strategies are rush, economy, and defense. Yeah. With rush beating an economy strategy, economy beating a defensive strategy, and defensive strategy beating a rush strategy. Right. And this is what we see in most strategy games as sort of the rock, paper, scissors underlying structure.
Yeah, and by removing essentially the effectiveness of one of those strategies, ultimately you've sort of just pushed everything into either economy or defense.
Well, and basically just economy,
right.
Because economy beats defense.
Right. So we've kind of referred to this as like the guns versus butter problem. It's an economic thing that we discussed in our bystanding video that you can watch if you're interested in that. But essentially, basically, what it's if you haven't watched that, it's going to sound weird, but everything is butter. Every player basically is trying to get as much butter as possible or build their resources up as fast as possible to try and win the game.
Overwhelm
the opponents.
And you probably at surface level might go, well, why does this seem like such a bad thing? I don't want the game to end on turn 3. But the problem is that it creates play patterns that are very similar, right?
Yeah.
Is that when it comes down to the, especially if we look at the high end of the format, CEDH, the competitive version, competitive-minded players,
right?
All those decks tend to have a very similar play pattern, which is like, how do I just build the most resources as quickly as possible?
Right. And I mean, it really does feel very similar. Whereas if you were to go into any sort of a healthier meta of a card game, like what standard Magic often ideally should be, is that there's usually a variety of decks that all sort of exist within some slot of either aggro, economy, or mid-range, but that doesn't really exist on the high competitive scale of EDH.
The next thing is this is something we call the 8th card problem of Commander, which is that you have a commander which is outside of your deck and is effectively an 8th card in your opening hand of 7 cards, and it's always the same card. It's always there. And the big problem here is that when you're trying to put together an A plus B combo, meaning 2 cards together basically win you the game, your commander can be one of those cards. This is best showcased in the card Time Sieve with Tivit as your commander. You basically get these 2 cards in play together, and you effectively win the game. It's not 100%, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the sort of goal of the Commander format is to create one that has more randomness to make the game more casual. This is something that I think completely undercuts that idea. The cool thing about Commanders is that they're cool, right? You're building a deck around them. They're the sort of ambassador of your deck, the hero of your deck. And so I don't think you should get rid of the commanders.
Right.
But find some way to make sure that the commander is also subject to the randomness of your deck.
It's not necessarily that the commander is a problem. It's that the game was never designed with commanders in mind, right? So if the game is designed with commanders in mind, then you can try and make sure that A plus B combos are thought of from the very beginning. But because they weren't, right, and they were never really thought of or integrated with commander purposes in mind, it's become much easier to do than I'm sure the designers would ever intend if they had started from the ground up with this type of a format.
The next thing is something that we see come up a lot in free-for-all board games, which is some way to limit the direct interaction between the players.
Yeah.
Usually we see this as you can either maybe only attack the people to your left or to your right, or you can only attack people across the table, or
there's a third party that you're interacting with, usually in the center of the table.
Right. Some way to sort of mitigate the amount of direct interaction with other players. And this is something that alleviates a problem called kingmaking. One of the problems it alleviates, but majorly kingmaking is the one where if you have if you have more than 2 players playing the game, you have a third or fourth player, and one of the players cannot win the game, there's a possibility because of the direct interaction that they can decide who will win the game of the 2 people who possibly could.
Right. Because
they can directly affect one of them and play Kingmaker and decide who's going to win.
Right, which inherently then ends up having politics take up a greater level of agency and importance in the skill of the game.
Yeah.
If you're trying to alleviate some of those problems, then you're going to have to somehow manage that direct interaction in some way.
Right, and there's 2 charts in Richard Garfield's Characteristics of Games where he basically discusses, okay, well, randomness reduces the returns from skill, meaning you'll need to play more games to figure out who is more skillful at the game, where politics nearly eliminates the returns from skill.
At a certain point.
At a certain point, politics removes it. So you want to try to find that balance of, okay, well, you want some politics because it's a free-for-all multiplayer game, but you don't want the politics to override any kind of skill expression in the game.
Right. And a good example of this would be like looking at Settlers of Catan as an example, because I think that it's just a popular enough game. Hopefully people will be able to understand or reference it or watch a video of it. But essentially Settlers of Catan, like you aren't completely in control of who you can directly affect. So at the beginning of the game, you could be in a 4-player game. 3 players could be scattered across the map, and you could all collectively decide in a political decision, oh, we're all going to target that one person. But you have to actually interact with the game in order to hopefully then interact with them. You have to build roads, build settlements, etc. And it makes it much, much more difficult for 3 people to just suddenly decide to gang up on one person.
Right. Or like we said before with the king-making situation, you can't like choose to just build a road in front of somebody's settlement so they can't do it or whatever.
Right. Turn 1, build a road, block them off. Like, you need to actually be able to connect there yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing we think would be an interesting change, this actually already exists, sort of, plane chase. Plane chase adding some kind of random effects to the game itself. And this is something that's sort of an inspiration from Smash Brothers, in that items in Smash Bros, effectively, right? Where there is this extra layer of randomness to the game that can interject hopefully in a way that it was going to help players who are behind or hinder players who are ahead, but just in general, having some kind of extra level of variance to the game that changes players' resources or makes them have to react in real time, that can just sort of interrupt what might otherwise be a fully strategic plan.
And I think that this is a way that is essentially it's leaning into some of the more political but more casual aspects of the game. And in fact, this is actually what Keyforge did very recently, which we just found out about this. That Keyforge actually just started their own free-for-all multiplayer format, and they have a really interesting solve that is essentially official plane chase in a way. So you get a small pool of cards, I believe it's called loot or something like that. And basically the game is played in rounds, so every player turn that goes around the table is 1 round, and at the end of each round, the loot cards are shuffled back in and redistributed to players. And then they have speeds, and so like each player then in turn, before the next round starts and players go around, they activate their loot cards. And they have different effects. Yeah, I don't know them off the top of my head, but I'm assuming it's just random, you draw an extra card or you target that person and do something or something like that.
Right.
But what it does is it sort of creates this level of additional variance that is working against probably, I guess it's kind of strange that Keyforge does this too, because Keyforge already has so much variance in its deck construction that I think really it's just leaning a little bit more into sort of the party game casual nature of a free-for-all direct interaction game.
So one of the really big problems with Commander that we see is what we call the bystander dilemma. And basically what it means is that players are incentivized to basically not engage, where any type of engagement that you take dwindles your resources and then the resources of whoever you are interacting with. So you're much better off spending your resources to acquire more resources, to eventually overwhelm the table in one go, rather than interacting directly with one player or another. One way to alleviate this is actually the Monarch mechanic, which is great. I think that Commander should probably have this in at baseline. Somehow the game starts this way, and the Monarch is a factor the whole time. This is seen in another Richard Garfield game, Vampire Bloodlines.
Vampire something.
Eternal Struggle. Vampire the Eternal Struggle.
Sure.
That's what it is.
Okay.
And the mechanic there is called the Edge. So what Monarch does is at the end of your turn, you draw a card. But then if any other player does combat damage to you, they take the Monarch card. And there's only one Monarch card gets passed around the table.
Right.
So this really incentivizes you to sort of take action against other players because there's a clear asymmetry between players, and you want the monarch. The whole goal is to draw as many cards and make as many lands as you can. You're making butter.
Having any sort of a systemic level rule that encourages interaction with your game, whatever that might be. So, King of Tokyo, another Richard Garfield game, is a great example of this, and that basically you have to hit players at a certain point. That forces interaction. And so you can't just be a bystander and sit by idly. You might have to interact because that's how the dice ended up rolling. Or it might be that because someone interacted with you, you now... we're doing the video on action bias already?
Yeah.
That'll be out. Or someone else might end up hitting you, which can lead to action bias, which we should have a video on that out at this point. So you can go watch that. But essentially just encouraging you to feel like you want to get payback and you want to then attack that person as well or interact with them as well. But this is probably, I think it's interesting because this is one of the most fascinating differences, I think, in Commander Magic compared to other free-for-all multiplayer games. Mm-hmm. That in almost all other free-for-all multiplayer games, the idea of you either gaining resources or gaining guns, essentially, or actions, eliminates the opportunity for other players to get those same things.
Right.
In Settlers of Catan, if you build a road somewhere, someone else can't build a road there.
Yeah.
And Civilization games have this, Risk has this, all these other games have this in a similar fashion, but Commander does not have it. And so the problem is, it just encourages complete inaction. And
there's the resource generation's not zero sum is what's kind of interesting, right? You don't end the game by just acquiring a bunch of resources, although you sort of do. And what's interesting is that play pattern emerges, but the system doesn't necessarily facilitate it. It's just that ends up being the best course of action, because if you lose resources and you're attacking one player and they lose resources, this is the externality of negative externality effect, where you have pulled each other down and the other two players haven't done anything.
Right. And so, you could either, like you were mentioning, either use the Monarch or Goat or some other mechanic or something to encourage this sort of extra action, or you have a systems level incentivization.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
Sure.
Sure. Or you're incentivized. Now I'm not confident with it. Or you're incentivized on a systems level to basically you gain a reward for your actions, right? Attacking someone, you take their land or something like that. And suddenly it's like, oh, well, that is possibly worth attacking in order to gain that reward.
Right. That would create sort of a system that makes it so that guns are a viable strategy. Currently in Commander, they are not. Guns meaning direct removal, direct interaction, those kinds of things. And so if that's the case, now you can have diverse play patterns and much more interaction with players rather than everybody just sort of playing solitaire and then seeing who gets there first. Okay, another thing that I think is very important is some kind of way to limit the card pool. Currently, you can play... I'm sure Commander players are very much like, what the whole point of the format is that we can play with every card in existence. And
we don't think so.
You don't want that.
Preach it, sister. Hallelujah. Tell them.
God damn it.
Tell them.
Yeah, okay. You want to limit the card pool because the card pool is defined by its most powerful cards. It's defined by the mistakes that have been made. And there's no way to sort of turn over that soil to make sure that you're getting into new cards and new play patterns other than...
banning. Or erratas.
Or power creeping. That's really all you can do, right?
And
you can
every
go
time
tall.
that happens, it's never a positive headline.
Right.
I don't think it's ever people that are like, thank God this got power crept
Damn,
out.
I'm so happy. I have to buy new cards.
Yeah.
So basically, with power creep or incentivizing players to buy new cards, you have three options, but two, you can go tall, which is power creep. You can go wide, which is complexity creep, meaning cards get to do more things. We see both of these things being utilized by Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
And the third secret way to fix power creep is some kind of rotation, some kind of limitation on the card pool, so that players are incentivized to play with different cards that they wouldn't normally play with.
Right.
And that's honestly what Commander was all about when the format first came out, was how playing with cards that normally didn't get any kind of time.
Right. And I mean, we're seeing some potential moves from Wizards here with the Foundation set that's going to be coming out soon. Not sure. At the time of recording this, there hasn't really been many cards revealed, but like it's very possible that they may be trying to do this in a way. Because as much as you could say that Commander is an eternal format, there's just some cards that they may be from the very first set of Magic and are garbage cards, and you're never going to put them in your Commander deck.
Right.
And so technically there's ways of controlling eternal formats, essentially by power creeping or locking the use of some cards out by forcing you to have to use other cards in tandem with them. And this is actually how Yu-Gi-Oh! Has solved it. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also an eternal format game. They do have banned lists. They have restricted lists and stuff. That's how they end up covering their sort of patching their holes in their own system. But this is their way of sort of controlling the meta as well.
So an example being that if you want a really powerful effect, it needs to be played in a deck that has like Blue Eyes White Dragon in it.
Right.
But I think Magic's expression of this could be something like cards or commanders or decks that are sort of limited to the various planes of existence. Like
God, I wish they would do that. We've mentioned it so many times.
I don't.
You know what they need? They just need, it's a mechanic. It could be Commander only, sure. It just says like Allegiance to Ravnica or something. Right. And that's on the card. And then suddenly you can use all Ravnica cards.
And I'm wondering if they should do it as like a benefit rather than like a restriction. Yeah, it's like if you have like almost like companion or something, right?
Yeah,
like, oh, you get this additional commander or something if you're playing only cards from Ravnica or something.
I think that's the only way they're going to be able to do it, because if we're talking about like power creeping as a way of controlling a meta, you basically kind of have to lift the entire floor in a particular format to make it to where, okay, now all cards we make are going to be replacing all of these previous cards. That way you can now sort of control what that baseline is. But currently you can't, right? Like there's so many, I mean, there's plenty of other things. We talked about all the other things you'd have to probably change about the system in order to get a handle on it. But that's one of the things for sure that could be done. So
the last and final thing that we think Commander needs is
love.
It needs discipline.
Oh. Is that in the note?
It needs a proper banned list.
That is in the notes.
That is in the notes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, proper banned list. So the way that the format is being managed right now, we're not going to get into that much, but basically there's a third party outside of Wizards of the Coast called the Commander Rules Committee who decides what cards get banned or not. And the way that they decide is not
a little strange.
Not good.
I think it's tough, right? Because I feel like a lot of the decisions made around Commander is sort of pretending like it's not a orthogonal game. It's a measurable game with a winner or loser, quantifiable, measurable stats of it. Like as if it's not that, as if it's not, basically it's a competitive game, right? I think people are looking at it too much as this is casual for reasons X, Y, and Z, but we've actually just listed multiple things that would actually make it more casual,
right?
In a way that's probably more fun.
Part of what I think is wrong with the way that the ban list is being handled now is that the Rules Committee has basically said that they're doing flag post bannings, which they're saying, hey, we're going to ban this card, but what we mean by banning this card is that other cards that have similar effects also shouldn't get played. And that doesn't work. So what ends up happening is that's very confusing to players, right? Because they're basically saying like, oh, okay, well, that must be the line. Therefore, anything on this side of the line, not banned, is fair game. So the best example is the card Gifts Ungiven, which is a very good card, especially in Commander. And then Intuition is not banned, right? Gifts Ungiven is banned. Intuition, not banned. They basically do the same thing. Intuition, however, is an old card that hasn't been reprinted and it costs hundreds of dollars. I think it's very easy for players to get confused as to like what they should be playing. And these flag post bannings, I think instead of serving as like as guidance to what you shouldn't be playing, are serving as guidance to what you should be playing, right? It's an indication of a powerful effect in the format, right? And they're saying, okay, well, this is too powerful. This is a thing you shouldn't be doing. So we're going to ban this one, but also don't play any the other ones that are like it.
I guess to me, it just seems to be another problem with like, okay, these cards were printed for a different purpose, right? They weren't printed for these particular outcomes. And I've seen, I'm not super familiar with the full ban list, but I've seen some of the ban lists and some of the reasons behind some of the bannings. And it does seem like some are kind of outdated in a way.
Coalition Victory is hilarious. I'm of two minds of this.
Yeah.
One is don't have a banned list and let players figure it out on their own, because that's sort of the spirit of the format anyway.
If you're leaning casual, you might as well.
Right. Or have a comprehensive ban list or a point system like Canadian Highlander, so that you can help guide the players to a better experience. Because right now you're guiding them to like the bad stuff.
It doesn't make any sense to me to have a ban list on something that's considered a casual format, because casual players just aren't going to use a ban list, and anyone that is abiding by the ban list probably isn't considered a casual player.
Sure.
And so, like, who's it aimed for, I guess?
And if we're thinking about like a ban list in a casual environment, you would want players to be able to have something to point to when they're having like a rule zero discrepancy where somebody's like, well, I think this is too powerful. And they're like, well, I don't think this is too powerful. Maybe that's kind of what they're trying to do with this, signpost banning. But if they're not playing the exact card that's on the ban list, it's really easy for someone to argue like, hey, well, it's not banned, right?
Right.
So I should be able to play it. Right. So
I feel
proper
like
ban list would be great.
Right now, it kind of just feels like, in general, Wizards tripped and fell into a massive money pit with Commander. Money pit sounds negative.
Yeah.
A money mountain. They've fallen up a money mountain.
They Scrooge McDucked into Commander.
Yes.
They're swimming in the money.
And I think, unfortunately, you get a lot of people with a lot of different opinions, most of them in our comments section. And a lot of people think even this video is us talking about like what could be changed. Yeah. But ultimately, like, I think we both agree, like, it's too much. Like, without making a new game, right? None of this can actually happen.
If all of this changed, Commander would be unrecognizable.
It'd be a completely different game. And so, like, we're not saying, like, oh, yeah, Wizards needs to do this to change this game. It's like, that's not possible.
Right.
It's that if you are going to make a game like this, maybe look at some of what Commander is dealing with, and consider, like, what do you want your game to be like? What are the things that you think are successful or unsuccessful about this? And I think what's happened is, this is a format that essentially was formed after the game had been, the game had been around for a little bit, but really started officially being supported 15 years after its development, a little longer than 15 years.
Yeah, something like that.
And
17 years.
Right. Imagine now you have to try and create that format and warp it around 15 years worth of cards, 17 years worth of cards that have already been existent. Like, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. So instead, what do? Do you just not make that product? Or do you make the product and go, I don't know, figure it out, guys?
Right. Or like, okay, well, thinking this might lead to problems down the road, but like, we'll deal with it when we get there.
Right.
So here we are.
We're there.